Good morning. I'm Christine Keisinger, and this is Recovery Rises. This is our Tuesday morning, 7 a.m. Gathering. Always remembering that these sessions are recorded and then they are uploaded to YouTube, to the Recovery Bank's YouTube channel. So they are made public, so you can feel free to turn your camera off if you feel like you want to, but I just like to make that known up front. There are a lot of people that watch these videos that don't get up at the 7 o'clock hour, so that's why we make them available. So last week, I introduced this idea that during times of great stress and overwhelm, our relationships can be a tremendous source of support, of nurturance, that we really, really need to lean into them. However, many of us might be finding that our relationships are really strained right now as well. In many cases, we're all living together, or a lot of us are living by ourselves, and so it's difficult to connect to others. But when we gather together or in periods of high stress and overwhelm, our relationship baggage, old patterns, forms of toxicity can really arise, dysfunctionality can really arise. So how do we protect ourselves from that toxicity? And at the same time, how do we make sure or ensure that our relationships are sources of support? So one of the ways to do that is to contemplate what I call the relationship rights. And if you remember last week, I said that these rights belong to you merely because you were born. In other words, you don't have to earn them. There's nothing you have to do in order to grant yourself these rights. They belong to you. For those of us that have walked this path, particularly the path of recovery, you may have noticed as we move through the rights, how many of these rights in your own life have been continually violated, and how important it's been for you to create boundaries in your relationships so that these rights are honored in you. And the other way that we need to also think about the relationship rights is we have to think about the degree to which we ourselves often violate these rights in others. We only moved through the first 5 during our hour last week, and that's because they're so important. So I'm going to review those 5, and then hopefully we'll get through the next 5, and I have some additional information as well related to these rights. So, right number 1, and this is really the relationship right that I believe is the foundation of all the rest. There are 25, okay? Number 1, I have the right, you have the right to be treated with dignity and respect all the time, regardless of your age, your stage in life, regardless of your role, your position, regardless of the context. It doesn't matter. You have the right to be treated with dignity and respect. The reason that I bring up age, stage, position is because oftentimes we deny ourselves the right to be treated with dignity and respect because we think that there are certain things or that can occur. We can find ourselves in situations where we can deny ourselves that right, or maybe we don't feel deserving of that right. For example, my nephew upon birth, who was taken into open heart surgery, right? He has no conscious awareness necessarily of what's going on. He cannot verbalize, We can't really interact with him only through touch. But at the moment of his birth, he has the right to be treated with dignity and respect, like all infants do. Just as my grandmother, who might be 94 years old, living in Wesley Village nursing home, struggling with end-stage Alzheimer's, she too has the same right to be treated with dignity and respect, just as my 4-year-old, my 14-year-old, my 24-year-old, my 44-year-old, my 94-year-old. It doesn't matter. At all phases of life, the beginning of our life, the end of our life, we have the fundamental right to be treated with dignity and respect. In order, however, to protect that right within ourselves, we have to ask, what does that mean for me? What does it mean to expect of others that we are treated in dignified ways, that we are treated in respectful ways? So really taking some time and asking yourself, what does that mean for me, dignity? What does respect mean for me? Because it means different things, but I can tell you that you all know and you all remember moments in your life where you were not treated in a dignified way, where you were not respected, because we feel it right here. We feel it in our gut. And when we don't address it, we often leave the situation feeling like, I just abandoned myself. I allowed myself to be treated in an undignified manner, a disrespectful manner, and I didn't protect that boundary. When we live in a relational system, or it can be a single relationship, where lack of dignity and lack of respect is present over time in a very chronic way, we actually begin to forget that we have this right. And it becomes part of the way that we operate, and it becomes part of what we expect in other relationships. So maybe what you can think about here is you go all the way back to what we call our first relationships, our first family, our family of origin. And we ask, was I treated with dignity and respect in that system? What did I learn about dignity and respect? What did I learn by watching perhaps the way my dad treated my mom, or vice versa? You know, what did I learn about dignity and respect in marriage, or in partnerships, or in intimate relationships? What did I learn about dignity and respect in my sibling relationships? What did I learn about dignity and respect in my first romantic relationships as teenagers? Those relationships are training grounds for the relationships that we call into our lives as adults. Now, for some of us, that might be really good news, and for some of us, that's awful news, right? So how did I determine what dignity and respect was? Some believe that I can elicit dignity and respect from people in my life because I come into the relationship with the energy of, this is what I expect of an adult relationship. So that's another way of thinking about it. What kind of energy do I bring into my relationships? And does it elicit dignity and respect from those people around me. So it's a big one. It's a very, very foundational right. We talked about it quite a bit last week, but I wanted to offer a review, and some people who are here today weren't here last week. So that's the first right. The second right, I have the right to follow my own values and standards, remembering that my values and standards are to be chosen by me, not chosen by others, not socialized into me. And the example that I gave last week is the example of, the little boy or girl who is born into a family of doctors. And the high expectation in that family is that you too will be a doctor. So maybe, during my second or third Christmas, I am given a toy Fisher-Price doctor's kit. And everyone around me is saying, you are going to be such a wonderful doctor, just like your grandfather, just like your father. And then I begin to see myself in that way. And then I'm 40 or 50 years old and I wake up one morning and think, I didn't choose this for myself. I always wanted to be a kindergarten teacher, right? So again, just like, what does dignity and respect mean for you? You can decide that now. If you've never given it thought or never given yourself permission to decide what it means for you, you can do the same for values and standards. What are my values and standards? And kind of give yourself that pink permission slip that says, I have the right to choose what my own values and standards are, and I have the right to live them without shame, without justification. The third right, I have the right to say no as a complete sentence without offering justification, explanation, rationalization. I have the right to say no. Every time you have a moment where you hear yourself saying yes, and you feel like someone has punched you in the gut, like, ugh, why did I do that? That's a good sort of alarm of sorts that reminds you of this right. No matter what it is, I have the right to say no. And I don't have to be mean about it. I don't have to be aggressive. I can simply say no. And if I choose to give an explanation or a rationalization or justification, I can, but I must choose it. I should never feel like I'm obligated to provide that. I have plenty of people that I know who practice this right, who will say no to me as a complete sentence. And because I know that this is a right, I know that they don't have to offer me an explanation and a justification, and that's okay. Fourth right, I have the right to experience and to express everything that I feel without feeling ashamed of what I'm feeling, without feeling that what I'm feeling is wrong or bad, without feeling guilt about what I'm feeling. I feel what I feel. So I want to depart from this particular right and add to it. Very early this morning, I was thinking about the work of Virginia Satir. And Virginia Satir was one of the very, very first, if not the first, family therapists. She was one of the first therapists that understood that when there is something in a family like addiction or profound extreme dysfunction, any kind of very, very pervasive or erosive toxicity, whenever that's present in a relational or family system, we have to view it as something that's part of the whole system, as opposed to it being the fault of just one individual. So this aligns very, very well, not only with 12-step programs, but also with programs like Al-Anon. You know, this idea that we don't just seek treatment, or recovery is not just for the person struggling with addiction. It's also for all of the individuals who are part of the larger relational system. Because if those individuals are in recovery as well, it doesn't, or it is not in support of the hard work that the recovering addict is doing. So in order to support sobriety, the entire system has got to recover. The entire system has to change. So she was able to identify several kinds of things that seem to be present in a relational or family system when there are difficulties. And one of them that's very, very profound is related to feelings and the way in which feelings are either acknowledged in relational systems or not. And she created something that's really powerful called the 5 freedoms of functionality. The 5 freedoms of functionality. And what she means by the 5 freedoms is that every human being, much like the relational rights, is granted these freedoms just because we were born. We don't have to do anything to deserve them. But these are freedoms that we either are able to live out or not, depending on our family system. And when these freedoms are something that you are deprived of within your relational or family systems, inevitably there are going to be issues and problems. I want you to just take in the freedoms and again, ask yourself, have I been granted these? And if not, can I give them to myself? Or can I live in my relationships in such a way that these freedoms are present? All right, so here are the 5 freedoms. Just take these in. I have the freedom to see and hear what is here and now, instead of what should be, what was, or what will be. This is really important. I have the freedom to see and to hear what is here and now, rather than what should be, was, or will be. This reminds me of the work of Claudia Bank, who studied families where alcoholism was present. And she writes that in the family where alcoholism is present, there is often what is called the no see, the no feel rule. In other words, as children, we don't see it, we don't feel about it, and we certainly don't talk about it. So it's no see, no feel, no talk. We don't talk about what's actually going on. And if any of us bring it up, it is often met with some kind of resistance. No, that's not what you saw. No, you didn't hear that. Shh, you must never talk about that. So think about what it might feel like to live in a relational system where you are put in a position of doubting your own reality. of doubting what you see, of doubting what you feel, of not being able to talk about what you see, hear, and feel. No, you didn't hear that. When the realities that we are experiencing are not validated, and we are made to feel wrong for pointing it out, we are made to feel bad, we are made to feel crazy. Like, what's wrong with you? That's not what's happening here. In other words, Claudia Black says, God bless the child who comes forward and says, hey, family, there is an enormous purple elephant standing in our living room. Do y'all see it? The purple elephant standing for the problem. And family members, no, that's not there. That's not there. We don't acknowledge that you see that. Be quiet. Hold that back, repress that. Oftentimes we do this to ourselves, by the way. We don't grant ourselves the freedom. I didn't see that. I didn't hear that. I'm certainly not going to talk about it. So you deserve the freedom to see and hear what is here and now, rather than what you think should be, was, or may happen in the future. That's the first freedom. The second freedom is I have the freedom to say what I feel and think, rather than what I should feel or think. I have the freedom to say what I think and feel, rather than what I should think and feel. You probably have had experiences where you said something about how you're feeling, or you said something about how you're thinking, and then you were corrected. You shouldn't feel that way. You shouldn't talk that way. So that whenever that is the response, you shouldn't feel this way, you shouldn't speak in this way or talk in this way, your freedom is being robbed of you. This is how I feel. This is what I'm saying. So we have to be very careful about correcting others in terms of what they're feeling and what they're thinking. This is a very common mistake that we can make as parents, especially when our children are feeling upset and they're expressing their upset. And we say things like, don't be upset about that. Or there are so many other things to be upset about. One of the things that many of us are doing right now to ourselves and to each other is we're engaging in what's called comparative suffering. When I'm suffering about something related to this pandemic, like if I feel some suffering around the fact that right now I can't see people I love, I might correct myself and say, but no one you love is sick. Or, well, how would you feel if you couldn't visit a family member who was hospitalized? In other words, you don't have it so bad. That is a correction of something that I'm legitimately feeling, which is the isolation or missing other people in my life. So we have to be really careful to never rob ourselves of what we feel, and to put shoulds, and to not correct ourselves when we are comparing our suffering to the suffering of other people. I have the freedom to feel what I feel rather than what I ought to feel. I have the freedom to ask for what I want without waiting for permission to express what I want, without waiting for an invitation to express what I most want and need. And I have the freedom to take risks in my life on my own behalf. I have the freedom to take leaps. I have the freedom to practice courage and bravery, regardless of what other people in my life think about what I'm doing or what I'm about to do. Our capacity to take risks, to express bravery, because it's related to things that we genuinely want, is a great freedom and ought not to be, again, corrected, punished, or disciplined by other people in our lives that don't quite agree with an action we're about to take or a decision we're about to take. So these are called the 5 freedoms because when they are honored for you within any relational system that you're part of, you can live in that relationship feeling really free. And when you honor these freedoms in others, you create this beautiful, fertile ground for them from which they can just grow and really thrive. So again, imagine if you had the freedom to have your reality confirmed. This is what I see, this is what I heard, and this is what I want to talk about, without having that corrected or having that reality replaced with another reality. This is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm feeling. Do not tell me what I should think or feel. This is what I want. And I don't have to wait for permission to express that. And this is a risk that I'm taking. And this is an act of courage that I'm making, without having that diminished or having that opportunity robbed from me, or without having someone try to talk me out of it. These are freedoms. So I want to pause and I want to open it up for anyone who would like to share an observation about the 5 freedoms. Remember, they're called the 5 freedoms of functionality, as opposed to dysfunctionality. In other words, if these freedoms are granted to you and you offer them to others, you can pretty much ensure that the relationship or the family system is going to be high functioning. Dysfunction, it's hard for dysfunction to live in a place where the 5 freedoms are being honored. So any comments about that? You can unmute yourself if you'd like to talk. Katie? Anyone? Thoughts about those? I see Katie's lit up here, but I'm not sure if you wanted to say something or for some reason. Okay. Anybody? Okay, we'll just hold those. Hold the 5 freedoms. Just kind of take them in. maybe reflect upon them. Again, I thought about them this morning, not just in relationship to today's content, but also related to some other work that I'm doing later this week with regard to freedom as it relates to feelings and emotion, giving ourselves the freedom to feel what we feel. All right, so fifth right, I have the right to feel safe. And this is where we left off last time. I have the right to feel safe, physically and emotionally safe in all areas of my life. All right, new rights. Right number 6. I have the right to take time for myself. So this right really speaks to the right that each of us have related to exceptional self-care. And one of the things that I talked about, I think in our first session, was what I identify as the 4 pillars of my own recovery. One is my relationship to my higher power. The second pillar of my own recovery is practicing exceptional levels of self-care. And part of exceptional level of self-care for me is feeling that I have the right to take time for myself. And this was a right that I failed to honor in my own family when I was actively parenting and feeling a lot of stress and overwhelm around my role as a mom. And part of that stress and overwhelm was related to never giving myself permission to take time for myself. One of the things that we know about a really healthy relationship, especially between 2 people, whether it's a friendship, a marriage, or a romantic relationship, is the ability to balance the tension between autonomy or our independence and our simultaneous need for connection. And that oftentimes between 2 people, there's a lot of tension between these 2 competing needs. For example, we might go through stages or phases of our relationship where one of us really does need more alone time than the other, craving more time for independence, needing to have opportunities to be away from the relationship. And what can make this problematic is when I feel a little bit like I need some independence, I need to be away from the relationship. And right now you're feeling a very, very strong or really intense need for connection. So these needs can be in competition with each other. And when 2 people are really conscious about their relationship, they're able to speak about that competition or these competing needs in very honest ways. Like right now, I really have to be honest with you. I need to get away. We might see if we're living with other people right now, if we're sheltering with other people right now 24/7, we might be finding it very, very difficult to have that time alone. This is one of the reasons why I've been recommending, especially for families that are all living together, that we create spaces and opportunities within the context of our own home for everyone in the family system to have alone time. It is incredibly healing, and it is incredibly necessary to who we are as human beings. So we have the right to claim for ourselves the need to take time. So this is a way in which we recharge. This is a way in which we are able to rest. This is a way in which we are able to reflect. And there's a big difference between taking time for ourselves and being lonely. So again, you want to ask, inside of your relational systems, have you given yourself this right? Is this a right that terrifies you? When someone in your life that you're relating to or connected to is expressing that they want to be alone, does it feel threatening? Has it hurt your feelings? Have you ever felt suffocated by another person when you have expressed your desire to take time for yourself? So again, thinking about this right in two ways. Do I protect this right for me? And do I grant this right to other people in my life that I love? Or have I violated it? So I have the right to take time for myself. Connected to that is, I have the right to change my mind. I have the right to change my mind without feeling guilty, ashamed, bad, or crazy. Perhaps I've made a decision and feel differently about the decision. Perhaps I've chosen a particular course of action and I'd like to take it in a different direction or put myself in reverse. I have the right to change my mind. I can't tell you how many people will make decisions and they will ruminate over the decision, or they will be on the precipice of making this decision and feel so paralyzed by it because they believe that it is definitive, that if I make this decision, I will never be able to get out of it. I will never be able to change my mind. This grows out of really rigid thinking. And many of us may have grown up in our first families, our families of origin, in ways where that was the instruction. Once you decide, that's it. That's rigid thinking, which does not lead to a free life. We all, as human beings, have the right to change our minds when something no longer feels right for us. We are never, ever locked in. We are never imprisoned by the decisions that we make. I have the right to ask for what I want. We've already talked about this in terms of the 5 freedoms. Some of our greatest suffering arises out of keeping what we most want and need completely repressed. And then moving through life, feeling like we're half living our lives, or we're not living at all. And part of our recovery is taking ownership of the things that we most want and need, and taking ownership of our ability to express those things, which might be utterly terrifying. Again, this is often linked back to family of origin, our first family, where it wasn't safe or it wasn't allowed for us to say, hey, this is what I want and this is what I need. If you grew up in a family where, for example, children were to be seen but not heard, then you did not grow up in a family where the expression of what you wanted and what you most needed was allowed. I have the right to ask for information. Why does this matter? The right to ask for information is quite similar to the right to ask for what I most want and need. I like to think about being the little girl in school who was terrified of raising her hand because she worried that her question was stupid, or she worried that asking was something that she didn't deserve to do. One of the things that I tried to instill within my own kids at a really, really young age is this idea that no question is a stupid question. And that if I want to learn and if I want to grow, I own my own questions, and I take ownership, and I give myself permission to raise my hand whenever I need to raise my hand. If you were that child who was terrified of raising his or her hand because you worried about how others would perceive you in asking the question, or that somehow you would be punished for asking the question, then this is a right that you want to give to yourself. I have the right to ask a question so I can better understand. I have the right to ask a question or to ask for information so that I have clarification. I have the right to ask for information without feeling like I'm putting the other person out, or I am a burden to the person that I'm asking the question to. This is a really big right. I think we would all agree that this is really important. Like, yeah, it's really important that we feel that we can ask questions and ask for information. But putting that into practice is an entirely different story. So, do you grant yourself that freedom? Do you feel yourself getting nervous? I mean, one of the easiest examples, a pretty simple example to bring to mind is, what do you do when you can't figure out where you're going? When the GPS isn't working, when the directions you were given aren't correct? Do you drive around endlessly trying to figure it out? Or do you stop and ask? And how willing are you to stop and ask for information? When you're in the doctor's office and you're talking about a certain kind of condition, or your doctor is giving you a lot of information, how willing are you to interject every time you need to ask your question without feeling afraid that you're putting the doctor out, or that somehow the doctor doesn't have time for you, or that you don't deserve to ask the questions that you have about your own health and well-being? You have the right always to ask for information. I have the right to make mistakes. I have the right to make mistakes. That is the 10th human right. I not only have the right to make mistakes, I have the right to welcome them. I have the right to understand that my growth, my involvement as a human being, mostly arises out of those episodes, those situations where I royally screwed up. When I give myself the right to make mistakes, and I actually have a positive attitude toward the fact that I'm gonna mess up, I'm actually going to fail. When I have a positive attitude toward that, or what we call a growth mindset, we increase our growth, our personal growth, exponentially. When I think about all the areas in my own life where I grew exponentially, or I achieved at a really high level, those achievements and that growth were really, really grounded in all of the numerous steps along the way where I really screwed up and just got back up again and got right back in the game again. Never stopping. Because in the face of failure or in the face of making mistakes, oftentimes that will put us in total paralysis, or it puts us into a position where we just completely abandon the effort. We just don't go any further with it. And that's really related to the utter terror that many of us have about messing up. That somehow messing up, failing, not succeeding, making a mistake is going to be met with some sort of punishment that we're really not going to be able to bear. Again, that often goes back to our first family. How were mistakes treated in your very first relationships? How was failure talked about? Were mistakes, was failure met with some sort of retribution, punishment, disappointment? You know, bringing home a B on a report card in a subject that you really struggled with, and rushing to your parents and showing them the B that you really, really worked hard for, and having that met with, why isn't this an A? Why isn't this a B plus? Knowing everything that it took for you to get to the B. So when we look at our lives and we look at places in our lives where we really struggled to grow, how much of that growth rested on so many episodes of screwing up? You wouldn't be here. I doubt that you would be here, because if you're here, you're in a position where you're experiencing and you're open to exponential growth. And therefore you're willing to mess up. Grant yourself that right. So I have the right to take time for myself. I have the right to change my mind. I have the right to always ask for what I want. I have the right to ask for information when I need it. And I have the right to make mistakes. Those are the next 5 rights. So I want to stop, and I want to open it up in the last 10 minutes here I'm really curious about which of these rights, the second 5, resonated with you today. Just unmute when you'd like to talk.
Christine, I like the one, you have the right to change your mind, because I think that's really important. You know, sometimes as a situation unfolds, whether it be with relationships, any kind of relationship, you know, things change and your opinion changes and facts change. And I like that, because sometimes I feel like afraid to speak up to change my mind, but I think that's a really important one to hear about this morning, because it is true. You know, we can change our minds, and that's okay. I know even as a parent in this situation, you know, like I was brought up in a very strict household, and I love my parents very much and they did a great job, but I find myself always trying not to be that strict with my children. And my youngest daughter is here with me now, and like sometimes I'll change my mind because I'll realize, like, after speaking with my husband, that I was too lenient or something. And then I'll be afraid, like, I can't do that. I already said I was going to say yes or whatever. But
Yeah.
I think that's a really important point to think about, and it had me thinking a lot this morning. So thank you.
You know, one of the things, Katie, that you just brought up that's really important is that oftentimes what we find when we don't grant ourselves the right to change our mind, just think about this in your own histories. How many relationships you may have stayed in far longer than you wanted to, or even far longer than was safe for you, because you didn't believe that you had the right to change your mind. I wanted to use that as an example and I forgot about that. But oftentimes, we are human beings, and it's just something that's fundamentally true about us is that we change our mind. So in direct reference, Katie, to what you just said, imagine the gift that you give to your kids when you go to them and say, you know what, I'm a human being. Just like you, I have the right to change my mind, and there's something that I changed my mind about, and this is it. So when you model that in your own family, then you teach your children, you too have the right to change your mind. We should never, ever feel imprisoned by a decision that we've made. Our context will change, other people change, aspects of who we are change. This is just something that we know about the human condition. And as such, we have the right to change our minds. We have the right to change our course of action. We have the right to change the nature of a relationship.
Thank you. That's so true.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anyone else? What resonated with you today?
I just missed the 8th one, and I was wondering if you could just say what that one is one more time.
I have the right to ask for what I want. Mm-hmm. And again, yeah, I reiterate, that's a tough one, especially for those of us that either grew up in families where you just didn't do that. I'll give you an example. A really simple example. I remember as a child, whenever I was getting ready to go over to a friend's house or even to go over to the home of a relative, if my parents were not going to be with me, my mom would always say, you never ever ask for something to eat or something to drink, and you certainly never go to the refrigerator without being invited. Right? So just think about that. And I could remember, being in other people's homes and dying of thirst or really, really hungry or being terrified to go and sleep over at a friend's house because I would think, well, what if I need something and I'm not invited, or I'm not granted permission, or I'm not offered something to drink or something to eat? I can't ask for it. So that came out of treating manners or teaching manners or how to be polite. But that was a message that was really imprisoning and really limited me. I didn't want to go to other people's houses for fear of being in a situation where I might have to ask for something and feeling like that wasn't permitted. That's just a very, very small example of planting a seed in the mind of a child, in the heart of a child, that says you can't ask for what you want because it would be violating good manners. And imagine how that might grow and stretch into other areas of life. Okay, so I have the right to ask for what I want. Mhm. Other comments? What resonated today?
Hi, my name's Vanessa.
Hi, Vanessa.
And hi, as you were sharing about the rights, I just kept thinking of empowerment and how I've, through my phases of recovery, I've learned how to set boundaries and how it hasn't been easy. And there's one in particular I set with a family member who um, it was just a very toxic relationship, and it was really hard to set the boundary, but what I needed to do to kind of stay on the straight and narrow for myself and or for my own peace and serenity. And recently, what's been coming up for me is second guessing if I should have um, kind of shut this person out of my life. And, from people in my support group, therapists, all kinds of people that genuinely have my best interests in my life keep encouraging me that I am doing the right thing. It's still, even though I know in my heart it's the right thing, um, because of, I think, codependency factors and I want to keep others happy, I often think maybe I could let go of this boundary and start seeing this person again. But as you're talking about all these rights, that's really what it comes down to. Like, I needed to hear everything that I'm hearing today because, like I said, I've just been going through these phases lately. It comes up now and then, but I don't know if it's more so because I'm home and it's on my mind more. And sometimes I think I'm not worthy of the boundary I set. I guess that's what I'm thinking as you're sharing about the rights each week, that I'm not worthy of these good things, and maybe I'd be better off pulling the boundary back and making maybe my mother happy or my father, and instead of my own happiness. But what I'm hearing you say is I have the right to be happy. I have the right to set this boundary. And it's just so powerful. So that's really all I have. Thank you for going over these rights. It's really helping me.
Thank you, Vanessa. This is what you just said is so important, especially when we are in a situation currently where we're having some discomfort because we did set a boundary and we're second guessing ourselves, which, by the way, is very, very common. And what I find in recovery, regardless of how it is that you came into recovery in the first place, it doesn't matter. Codependency and that tendency toward codependency is usually present. And the relationship rights matter most to me because they have been a way in which I keep myself safe and straight related to my own codependency issues. I would argue, or I would suggest, that codependency, is my primary disease. And it really, really has shown up in my life as a disease, as a condition, a chronic condition that needs daily attention. And part of why I feel so fiercely devoted to these rights and sharing them with others is because they keep me protected. And something that you said is really, really critical, and it's really the 22nd right. And it probably should be the first right. But right number 22 is, I have the right to be happy. It's very perplexing to me how far so many of us have strayed from this fundamental right. For example, and I like to think about this right in terms of babies, and in having 2 new babies in my life right now, I would never look at those children and say, you two need to earn your right to be happy. Never. I can look at them and say to the core of my being, they have the right to a lifetime of happiness. They will have their trials, they will have their tribulations, but they have a fundamental right to be happy. They don't have to do anything to deserve it. They don't have to knock themselves out. They don't have to prove to other people that they have the right to be happy. Now, how can I feel that way so strongly, the core of my being, every cell, to these infants, and yet somehow have decided that, but I didn't have that right? Or I have to knock myself out, or I have to prove to others that I have the right to be happy. There's a big disconnect there. But just merely because you were born onto this planet, you have the right to your own happiness. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to put in your time. You don't have to do anything to prove that you deserve to be happy. And part of that happiness is honoring these rights in yourself and in other people. So thank you for bringing the notion of happiness up, Vanessa. And you have the right to all of those freedoms. You have the right to the freedom to live in highly functional relationships and protect that. So, have a great week ahead. Next week, we'll move through the next 5 rights. Just grapple, think about the ones that were presented here today. I'm so glad you're all here, and I'll see you next Tuesday.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Take good care.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.